Ever get that feeling, like your iPhone's kind of holding out on you, like there's this whole secret menu of tricks just hiding in plain sight?
Oh, absolutely. It's like they give you this incredibly powerful device, but they don't exactly hand you the instruction manual for unlocking its full potential.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, unearthing those hidden iPhone gems. We're taking inspiration from a really cool blog post by Astrophoton's apps, which, by the way, is like stumbling on a buried treasure in the world of iPhone settings.
You're not kidding. Most people just kind of accept the default settings and never realize how much they're missing. We're talking about little tweaks that can dramatically improve your battery life, boost your privacy, even make your phone run smoother.
It's true. Okay, so before we get too far into the weeds of specific settings, for anyone who might not be familiar with Astrophotons, it's a pretty popular astrophotography app, right?
Exactly. And what makes this blog post even more interesting is that it comes straight from the app's developer, Paul Bielecki. He actually shares how he uses these hidden settings, not just as an iPhone user, but also as a developer himself.
See, that's what I love about deep dives like this.
Yeah.
We're getting real-world insights from someone who lives and breathes this stuff. So let's jump right in. One of the things that caught my eye in the article was this idea of using reduce motion to actually improve app performance. Now, I'm familiar with this setting for, if you're prone to motion sickness or want to save battery, but I never connected it to app development.
Right. It's actually brilliant when you think about it. All those subtle animations we see when an app opens or transitions between screens, they all require processing power. And while they might seem insignificant on a newer iPhone, they can really bog down older models.
So what does this mean for the average iPhone user?
By enabling reduce motion, you're not only potentially extending your battery life, but you're also helping developers like Paul see how their apps perform more realistically on older devices.
So it's a win-win. Longer battery life for me and a smoother app experience for everyone because developers are using this setting in their testing. I never would have made that connection.
And it really highlights an important point about user experience. What we often perceive as purely aesthetic choices, like fancy animations, can actually have real, tangible impacts on performance and accessibility.
It's like the old saying, form follows function, right? You can have the most beautifully designed app, but if it's laggy and slow, nobody's going to use it.
Exactly. And on the flip side, sometimes these hidden settings can actually enhance both form and function, even if they seem a little counterintuitive at first.
Okay, so we're already seeing how a seemingly simple setting like reduce motion can have these ripple effects. But let's dig into something a little more, shall we say, controversial: privacy. The article talks about limit ad tracking, which I feel like we've all seen in our settings, but maybe haven't given a second thought.
And it's understandable why. It's one of those settings that sounds good in theory, but then you see an ad for those exact shoes you were just looking at online. You're like, wait a minute, is this thing even working?
Exactly. So break it down for us. How does limit ad tracking actually work? And what are the limitations? Because let's be real, those targeted ads can be creepily accurate sometimes.
Oh, they absolutely can. Limit ad tracking, when you enable it, basically sends a signal to apps that you don't want your activity tracked for personalized advertising. But, and this is a big but, companies have gotten incredibly creative with how they gather your data.
You mean it doesn't mean they stop tracking?
Right.
Okay, so spill the tea. How are they getting around it?
Well, one trick is called fingerprinting, which basically creates a unique profile of your device based on things like your screen resolution, your operating system, even the fonts you have installed.
Wait, they can track me based on my fonts?
Sounds crazy, right? But, yep. And then there's something called device fingerprinting, which uses your phone's unique identifiers, like your IMEI number, to track you. And these are just a couple of examples.
Okay. Starting to feel a little like a spy movie over here. So, if limit ad tracking isn't a foolproof solution, what's the point? Should we even bother with it?
It's still a valuable tool. Remember, it's about making your preferences known. By enabling it, you're at least telling these companies that you value your privacy, even if they find workarounds. Plus, some apps do actually respect the setting and will limit their data collection accordingly.
So it's more about sending a message, even if it's not always received or acted upon.
Exactly. It's about being an informed user and making conscious choices about your data. You have more power than you think.
I like that. All right, so we've talked about how a setting that seems purely about aesthetics, reduce motion, can actually improve app performance, and how a privacy setting like limit ad tracking might not be a silver bullet, but is still an important step. Now, let's move on to a feature that I think a lot of people are familiar with, but for good reason: Find My iPhone.
Ah, yes. The digital guardian angel of iPhones. And it's a classic for a reason, but you'd be surprised how many people either don't have it enabled or don't even know about all of its features.
It's true. And let's be real, this isn't just about finding your phone when it's slipped between the couch cushions. We're talking peace of mind, especially in case your phone is lost or stolen. But what I found really interesting in the article was how Paul Bielecki uses Find My iPhone. And it's not what you'd think. It's funny how we can have these incredibly powerful devices in our pockets and still only scratch the surface of what they can do, right?
It's true, and I think it speaks to how well designed they are in a way. They just work, even if we're not constantly fiddling with settings and options.
Absolutely. But that's what we're here for.
Right.
To uncover those hidden depths and empower people to get the most out of their iPhones.
Exactly. And speaking of getting the most out of our iPhones, that actually reminds me of another point Paul made in the article about Find My iPhone. He uses it as a tool for, get this, time management and productivity.
Wait, really? That's not something you'd typically associate with Find My iPhone. Tell me more about that.
So he talks about how whenever he feels himself getting tempted to, procrastinate or just get sucked into his phone, he'll actually use Find My iPhone to locate it.
So he's not actually lost his phone. He's using it as a visual cue to snap himself out of it.
Exactly. He says the act of seeing his phone's location on a map, even if it's just across the room, helps him break out of that mindless scrolling loop and refocus on what he's supposed to be doing.
Wow, that's actually brilliant. I'm gonna have to try that myself. It's like a little mental trick to outsmart your own brain. But on a more serious note, you mentioned peace of mind earlier. And speaking of peace of mind, the article also touches on medical ID, which, I'll be honest, I kind of glossed over initially. But when I really stopped and thought about it, wow, this is a potentially life-saving feature.
It really is. It's one of those things you set up and hope you never have to use, but if you ever need it, it could be a game changer.
For those who might not know, can you give us a quick rundown of what medical ID is and why we should all have it set up?
Absolutely. Imagine this. You're in an emergency situation, and for whatever reason, you can't communicate your vital information. First responders are trained to look for things like medical alert bracelets, but what if you don't have one?
That's where medical ID comes in.
Exactly. It's like a digital medical alert bracelet built right into your iPhone.
Okay, that's huge. So what kind of information can you store in there?
Everything. Your blood type, known allergies,
Right.
medications you're taking, emergency contacts, even your organ donor status.
It's like having your entire medical history in your pocket.
Exactly. And anyone can access it in an emergency, even if your phone is locked.
Wow. I had no idea you could pack that much information into this one feature. Medical ID just went straight to the top of my must-have iPhone settings list.
I think everyone should have it set up. It's just one of those things that takes a few minutes to do and could potentially make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about maximizing battery life, protecting our privacy, and even potentially life-saving features. But let's be honest, one of the best things about having a smartphone is making it, well, ours, right?
Absolutely. Our phone should be an extension of ourselves, reflecting our personalities and preferences.
Exactly, and that's where customization comes in. And you guessed it, Paul Bielecki has some pretty cool thoughts on this as well.
What I love about his approach to customization is that it's all about intentionality. He's not just randomly changing things, he's carefully curating his iPhone experience to make it work best for him.
He's treating it like a tool to enhance his life, not just a distraction. And one of the areas where this really comes through is in his use of Siri shortcuts.
Oh yes, Siri shortcuts are a game changer when it comes to customization.
Now, I'll admit, I've dabbled with shortcuts here and there, but Paul takes it to a whole other level.
He really does. In the blog post, he talks about how he uses Siri shortcuts to automate his entire morning routine. Waking up, grabbing his phone, and with just one voice command, he's got his calendar for the day, the latest news headlines, even his coffee brewing.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's next level stuff.
Yeah.
But for those of us who are maybe a little intimidated by the idea of programming our own shortcuts.
Right. It can seem daunting at first.
It does. So what advice does Paul have for us mere mortals?
He says the key is to start small. Don't try to automate your entire life at once. Just pick one or two small, repetitive tasks you do on your phone every day.
Okay, that makes sense. So like instead of digging through my settings to disable Wi-Fi when I leave the house, I could just create a shortcut for that.
Exactly. Or if you have a go-to playlist for your workouts, you can create a shortcut to start playing it with a simple voice command.
It's about identifying those little pain points in your day-to-day routine and using shortcuts to smooth them out.
Exactly. And the beauty of Siri shortcuts is that they can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. You can start small and work your way up to more intricate automations as you get more comfortable.
It's like learning a new language, I guess. Start with the basics and go from there.
Exactly. And speaking of customizing our digital worlds, let's talk about Control Center.
Oh, Control Center. This is one of those features I use all the time, but I always feel like I'm just scratching the surface.
I think a lot of people feel that way. We get used to that default layout and don't realize how much we can personalize it.
So instead of it just being a quick way to, adjust the brightness or volume, we can turn it into a real control hub for our digital lives.
Exactly. Think about the things you access most frequently on your phone. It could be anything from turning on low power mode to activating your favorite voice recorder app, whatever you use all the time.
I am constantly scrambling to find my Apple Pay when I'm trying to pay for something, and it's always this awkward fumbling moment while everyone's waiting.
You're kidding. You can add a shortcut for Apple Pay right in your Control Center.
Wait, seriously?
Seriously, it takes 2 seconds to set up. No more fumbling.
Okay, that's going straight to the top of my Control Center must-haves. But while we're on the topic, I'm also curious about accessibility here.
Yeah.
We talked about how reduced motion can make things easier for people with certain visual sensitivities. But what about Control Center?
That's a great question. Apple has actually built some fantastic accessibility features directly into Control Center. For example, you can add shortcuts for things like voice control, which lets you control your phone entirely with your voice, or zoom, which magnifies the screen.
It's amazing how these little tweaks can make such a big difference for people.
It really is. Technology should be accessible to everyone.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's talk about another important aspect of responsible technology use: safety. Earlier, we discussed medical ID and its potential to be a lifesaver. But Paul also highlights a feature that I think deserves more attention: do not disturb while driving.
It's such a crucial feature that often gets overlooked. It's easy to think, oh, I'm a good driver, I can handle a quick text at a stoplight. But the reality is, distracted driving is incredibly dangerous.
No doubt about it. And it's become so normalized, which makes it even more insidious. We see people on their phones at red lights, in traffic, and it's like our brains start to think it's no big deal. But it is.
It is. That's why features like Do Not Disturb While Driving are so important. They act as a digital barrier, protecting us from ourselves.
So how does it work? Does it just completely block all calls and texts while you're driving?
You actually have a lot of control over how it functions. You can set it to automatically activate when it senses you're in a moving vehicle or turn it on manually. And you can customize it to allow calls or texts from certain people, like family members or emergency contacts, while silencing everything else.
That makes sense. There are definitely some calls you don't want to miss. But I love that you can create those exceptions while still having that barrier against unnecessary distractions.
Exactly. And here's the best part. When someone tries to contact you while Do Not Disturb while driving is on, they'll automatically receive a message letting them know that you're driving and will respond when it's safe.
Oh, that's a nice touch. It's like subtly promoting responsible phone use among your friends and family, too.
Exactly. It's about normalizing the idea that it's okay to disconnect, even for short periods, to prioritize safety.
Love it. Okay, so we've talked about using Siri shortcuts to automate our lives, customizing our control centers to be our own personal command centers, and leveraging Do Not Disturb while driving to stay safe on the road. What other customization gems does Paul have in store for us?
Well, this one might seem small, but he talks about the power of customizing your notifications.
Oh, notifications, the bane of my existence. But seriously, they can be so overwhelming and distracting.
Tell me about it. But Paul has a really interesting approach to managing them. He's all about being intentional with which apps he allows to send notifications in the first place.
That's smart. I feel like we often just accept the default settings and end up with a million apps vying for our attention.
Exactly. He suggests going through each app one by one and asking yourself, do I really need to be notified about this, like right this second?
That's a great question to ask, because most of the time the answer is no.
Right. It's about reclaiming control over your digital space and deciding what information is truly important enough to interrupt your flow.
So what about those apps that we do want to get notifications from?
That's where the customization comes in. Paul is all about tweaking the notification settings for each app individually. So maybe instead of a jarring sound, you opt for a subtle banner notification. Or maybe you group similar notifications to avoid feeling overwhelmed.
This is about finding the right balance. Right.
Exactly. We don't have to completely silence our digital worlds, but we can choose to create a soundscape that's more aligned with our needs and preferences.
I like that. It's about being mindful of our digital consumption.
Exactly. And it circles back to our earlier discussion about user experience. It's not just about the apps themselves, it's about how we use them to create a digital environment that enhances our lives, not distracts from them.
It's about being intentional with our tech.
Precisely. And that brings us to the heart of Paul's philosophy, doesn't it? It's not just about mastering these technical aspects of our iPhones, but about using them to cultivate a more mindful and intentional relationship with technology as a whole.
And that's a lesson that extends far beyond our iPhones.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of our digital lives and using technology to enhance our lives, not control them.
You know, it's funny, as we've been going through all these hidden iPhone features and Paul's insights, it's really got me thinking, this isn't just about tech tips, is it? It's deeper than that.
No, you're absolutely right. It's almost like a philosophy of technology. What I find fascinating is how Paulo sees these settings, these little tweaks, as a way to actually shape his relationship with technology. He's making it more conscious, more intentional.
He's not just using his phone, he's designing his experience.
Exactly. And one area where this really stands out is in his approach to digital well-being. He talks about using a combo of focus modes and downtime to create these really clear boundaries between like work, personal time, and sleep.
I'll admit, I haven't really explored focus modes that much. I'm more of a do not disturb or nothing kind of person. But the way Paul describes it, it sounds like a real game changer.
Oh, it definitely can be. Just imagine this. You're at work, right? You're super focused on a project, and bam, your phone lights up with a notification about a flash sale or some random thing.
The worst.
Right. And it's so easy to just get completely pulled out of your focus by that, even if you know you should ignore it.
Oh, I know it. It's like my brain can't resist a notification, even when I know it's nothing important. So how does Paul use focus modes to combat that?
He creates specific focus modes for different situations, almost like profiles. So he's got one for work, and in that mode, he only allows notifications from work-related apps and contacts. And then he's got a personal mode that prioritizes communication with, family and friends. Oh, and he's even got a sleep mode that pretty much silences everything so he can actually unwind without being disturbed.
So it's like he's creating these digital boundaries to protect his time and attention.
Exactly. And here's the really interesting part. He actually links those focus modes to his downtime settings. So let's say it's his designated downtime. Even if he picks up his phone, he's only going to see those apps he's okay with using during that time. Everything else is hidden.
It's like those guardrails people put on bowling lanes. It's like, nope, you're not allowed to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Exactly. And I think that approach to technology is just so crucial, especially these days when, let's face it, we're constantly bombarded with information and notifications and everything vying for our attention.
It's about being mindful,
Yeah.
right? Intentional about how and when we engage with technology.
Exactly. Setting those healthy boundaries between our digital lives and, the real world. And it really makes you think so much of what we've talked about with Paul's approach. It goes way beyond just the technicalities of our iPhones. It's really about shifting our mindset.
It's about remembering that technology is a tool and we get to choose how we use it.
Exactly. We don't have to be slaves to our devices. We can design our digital lives to support our values and goals, and that's empowering.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the hidden world of iPhone settings, maybe this is the challenge we leave our listeners with today. What's one small tweak you can make to reclaim a bit of your time, your attention, or maybe even just your sanity in this digital world?
It could be finally setting up that medical ID for peace of mind, creating a custom focus mode for work or study, or even just taking a few minutes to declutter your home screen.
All great ideas. And remember, your iPhone is a powerful tool, but just like any tool, its impact really comes down to how you use it. So go explore, experiment, and discover all the amazing things your iPhone can do when you take control. Until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.